Welcome to this installment of the Resilient Professional Podcast. In this installment, we'll talk about the 6 key strategies you need to utilize to be a resilient professional so you accomplish your professional and personal goals. Welcome to the Resilient Professional Podcast. Professional success really is a game of inches. You have the experience and knowledge, but you realize that professional success is more than just knowledge and experience. It's actually applying what you already know. It's about consistently applying what you know in spite of the challenges that are sure to come your way. You know, Olympians know how to battle adversity and to perform at their best, even in the midst of setbacks and frustrations. I think we can learn a lot from the Olympian mindset. It really is about the cultivation of resiliency. Physical resiliency, emotional resiliency, relational resiliency, cognitive resiliency, resiliency in each aspect of our lives. On a regular basis, we'll unpack these ideas through guest speakers and podcast material that will take you to the next level of professional success. Well, hi everyone, Sean here. Today we're going to talk about cultivating resilience. And in previous podcasts, we talked about what resilience is, what it means professionally, why it's so important. And just as a reminder, it's important because our ability to get professional goals and objectives done is really dependent on our ability to have creative powers, physical powers, the energy to get through the natural challenges that come up in our professional lives. It could be market challenges, it could be just relational challenges, it could be challenges that we experience in our own health and personal energy. Those are realities. So the Resilient Professional Podcast is intended to give you some ideas to fight through those realities. Now, in a previous podcast, we talked about the importance of finding resiliency in the lives of people around us. We have role models, people who are friends or family that have gone through difficult circumstances and have gotten through it fine. In fact, emerged out the other end even better in some ways than they were. So we need to look for those role models. I also encourage people to go to the library or go to Amazon and download some books or biographies on people that you admire who are very resilient, had amazing bounce back ability to get through difficult and challenging times. So we're going to talk about cultivating resilience today. So the first thing we need to do when we cultivate resilience is to become, I think, self-aware. And that's about facing our current reality. We have a great ability to rationalize away issues in our personal lives because it's difficult, right? We don't want to have to deal with it. It takes energy to face those problems. But one of the most important things around resiliency training we talk to people about is facing our fears and facing the reality of our current circumstances, because these rationalizations can lurk in the background and they can blindside us when we least expect them. For example, you think your marriage is in good shape, but then one day you come home and your partner's bags are packed at the door, and or they're gone, and there's a goodbye letter, and you're completely shocked that you're going through that particular experience. Now, after you go through it, you realize upon reflection that maybe things weren't quite as rosy as you thought they were. But unfortunately, it was too late. You didn't have the ability to be reflective and to do self-assessment and to be aware that maybe the relationship needed to be worked on. Another example comes from a popular winter pastime in my neck of the woods, which is beer league hockey. It's a fun recreational activity. Lots of guys, even gals that I interact with, played hockey when they were younger, and they want to continue the sport, stay healthy and active. It's a great social activity. But again, they've rationalized away that weight gain, that 10, 15, 30 extra pounds that they have. And they think they can just jump on that ice and sprint around like crazy and it not having an impact. And unfortunately, there's reports all the time, every winter, and that people come down with heart attacks, even worse, not just a heart attack, but die prematurely. And so they rationalize away the reality of their own physical condition. So we need to fight the tendency to rationalize away important issues in our lives. And so in the Resilient Professional Workbook, I'm not going to talk about the assessment piece in a lot of detail in this podcast, but on the website you can download the Resilient Professional ebook, and in there are a whole set of exercises to help you identify in each of the key areas of your life how you're doing. We look at your physical aspect of life, your emotional, relational aspects, your cognitive, your intellectual aspect, how engaged you are, do you have really compelling purposes and ideas about what you want to accomplish and what you want to strive to achieve. And so I'd really encourage you to go to those worksheets, take a look at them, and do your own self-assessment to see whether there's any areas that you need to be working on because they could be compromising your ability to be resilient and to have real bounce-back ability when challenging times come into your life. Now, the second area to be mindful of is to really understand the change process. There is a process around initiating change in our lives. So we've identified some issues, some blind spots, some rationalizations, and we want to deal with them. Now, for most individuals, when they do finally face the current reality of their circumstances, they have a great deal of enthusiasm often to change. And, a good example would be New Year's resolutions, right? How many of us have, on the New Year's Eve or just before it or after, we've resolved to initiate some important changes in our lives? I love to work out. That's a really important value in my life. I just find it really keeps me on an even keel, and it's always hilarious to me how every January, February, maybe March, how busy the gym is during those months. But I know that if I just wait a little bit longer, those busy gyms that are full will be a lot less full by the time we hit the spring or April. And the reason is most people do not have staying power when it comes to the change process. So they start with great excitement and enthusiasm, but then that enthusiasm wanes. And so what's the problem? Well, when you're finally ready to face your current reality, you've got lots of emotional energy to get started. Now, that's a great beginning, but that's not enough to sustain real and lasting change. You also need to be building in supports that will help you to make that change stick. Now, I have, if you listen to this podcast, make sure you go to the landing page for this podcast, because I'll include a video that we've produced that looks at the main habits you need to introduce into your life to initiate positive change. And if you introduce those habits, you have a multiplier effect that just greatly enhances your ability to initiate change in your life. So the first part of the journey is to make sure that you are doing a self-assessment. You have identified issues you need to deal with. Step 2 is you need to undergo the change process. It's exciting to identify those things. It's exciting to have those goals. That creates the initial emotional energy to get moving on those goals. But then you need to have specific strategies that will support you in that change process, because you'll start petering out if you don't have these principles in mind. So take a look at the landing page for that video so you can get more information on some of those principles to utilize. The next step is to harness the power of habits. And most of us have a constellation of good habits and bad habits. And we pick up a lot of habits just unconsciously. They just sort of come into our life. And habits are incredibly important because they help to save energy, quite frankly. And so we've all had experiences when we're learning to drive for the first time, or you're learning to tie a tie, or you're learning to ride a bike. And if you reflect on those experiences, you remember just how difficult they were, but eventually it becomes unconscious. It's just a natural part of what you do, and it doesn't take a lot of thinking to do it repeatedly. And when it comes to the change process and building resiliency into our lives, we need to undertake a structured program of incrementally building in habits or rituals that will support the changes that we want to initiate in our lives. It's extremely important. So imagine how powerfully your life would change if you just introduced one new habit, one positive habit into your life every 3 months, or maybe 2 habits every 3 months. And after a year or 2 years, can you imagine the kind of revolution that would take place in your own personal development if you were successful in doing that? It would be quite incredible. So resilient people, resilient professionals have fostered that ability. They have nurtured that ability to always be on the lookout for habits that they need to introduce into their lives to foster creative change and real change in their lives, and to maintain that change so that they can achieve their personal goals and objectives. Now again, if you download the Resilient Professional ebook, we actually have a whole module on the habit formation and some useful information that will be of great assistance to you. Another really important principle is once you've, again, identified the areas of weakness, you've identified what you need to do in terms of the change process. You're now building in habits to support you in that change process. You also need to really engage with and identify with the principle of oscillation. And really that principle is you can't be on all the time. There's times when you need to be on and productive and be at your professional best, but then there's times when you need to disengage. And there's too many people that we interact with in our professional lives that there are two extremes. Some people who are just, quite frankly, lazy and never get really engaged. And then other people that are so engaged and so wired that they never slow down and they end up burning out. So if you want a long-term successful career and to basically accomplish your professional goals on a consistent basis over time, you need to engage in and really embrace the principle of oscillation, which means that you identify the core tasks you have to accomplish, the core money-making activities, the core activities that help you get your professional work done, and you just go for it in those areas as much as possible. Put in great time, great energy, great intentionality, but when you're done, you need to oscillate off that to rest and renewal. That's why it's so important that you build in buffers into your week where you take at least one day a week off, that you're totally disengaged from your profession. It's why you should take, likely at least 1 week off every 3 months and take an extended holiday. And what you find is you actually become more renewed, more invigorated. So when you do come back into your professional context, you can get even more done. But if you're just grinding it out all the time and never taking a break, your professional expertise, your creative capacities will be eroded. So make sure you embrace the principle of oscillation. And that principle can even be embraced through the day. In other words, you're going to have parts of the day where you'll be really, really effective, and parts of the day where, quite frankly, it's hard to marshal concentration. So many of us are very effective first thing in the morning, and by the time we get to lunchtime, we know that our effectiveness is beginning to wane. So you want to schedule activities that really can take advantage of your peak capacities. If you have creative work, important client meetings you need to engage in, try to make sure those are scheduled, as an example, at the time for you when you're at peak capacity. Now, what I'd like to do is talk about creating energy. That's the next component. So we can have great, goals and aspirations about how we want to achieve professional excellence. And we've identified the areas of rationalization. We've gone through that understanding of the change process. We've got new habits. We're harnessing the power of oscillation. But we also need to make sure that we're creating energy. And that's very simple. The Resilient Professional ebook has a pile of information on how you can do that. But bottom line is it's looking after your physical health, it's your dietary regimes, it's exercise, again, it's sleep. We've talked about that through the principle of oscillation. There's a whole bunch of things that you can be doing. Even the quality of your relationships have a profound impact on your energy. And so you want to make sure that you focus in on those aspects of your life that are draining the energy that you have. Try to get that looked after and try to focus on habits that will increase your physical capacities and energy. And then a final point on this whole topic is the importance of pushing your limits. In other words, you have these goals and you need to really push the envelope in certain areas to make progress. It can be very uncomfortable, but the only way that we can really move professionally and make progress is to get outside our comfort zones, whether it's meeting new people that can help us in our professional journey, whether it's challenging tasks, new ideas, new initiatives that are just something we've never tried before. It's really important to experiment and to fail along the way because you learn a tremendous amount. The average person has worked very hard to really take hardship and challenge out of their lives. And that's understandable. We don't like discomfort or struggle, for sure. And certainly there are misfortunes that no one would choose to experience. But if you think back to the times when you had great challenges, didn't you also learn the most during those times? And said in a different way, if you always take the easy road, aren't you missing opportunities to grow? And that's really the basic point here, is you need to push yourself to grow your expertise so that you can be a resilient professional. Okay, let me just summarize some of the main points of this podcast. Again, the first step in enhancing personal resiliency is facing your current reality. So we all need to fight the natural human tendency to rationalize away important issues that should be faced and wrestled to the ground. So these issues potentially could be really compromising your ability to be a resilient professional. To enhance resilience, we need to embrace the change process. And we've got some powerful strategies outlined in the video I referenced that we'll include in the landing page for this podcast. We talked about the principle of oscillation, that we can't always be pushing it. We need to embrace those natural cycles of life and our own personal energy and be very strategic about when we push ourselves to accomplish goals and make sure that we're really taking advantage of our own personal rhythms in terms of our energy and capacities. And we also need to learn to cultivate our physical energy. And that can be through a mix of things, including cultivating a powerful purpose, the feeding and caring of our bodies, and nurturing key relationships and becoming emotionally strong and healthy. And I think to work constantly to improve our overall cognition and creativity. So that summarizes this particular installment of the Resilient Professional podcast. Hope you enjoy the installment. Again, if you're trying to take your professional resiliency to new levels, please make sure you take a look at the ebook and download it for additional content and resources.